At the farthest edge of our solar system, beyond Neptune's orbit, there is a small and extremely cold world that is barely touched by the sun's warmth. And this is Pluto. It is so far from Earth that even sunlight barely reaches it. For many decades, scientists knew very little about this mysterious world. In fact, in most telescopes back then, it was just a small and blurry dot of light in the vastness of space. Because of this, many questions remained unanswered. How big is it really? What does its surface look like? And what other secrets does it hold? As the years passed and astronomers' technology improved, the mysteries surrounding Pluto gradually began to unfold. And one of the biggest surprises is that Pluto is not alone. It is a world traveling through the darkness of space. Yes, it actually has a companion, a strange celestial body that's almost half its size. And this is Charon. At first glance, you might think that this is just an ordinary moon orbiting Pluto. But as scientists study it more, it turns out that their relationship is not ordinary at all. In fact, there are astronomers who believe that they both orbit each other in a unique dance of gravity, and they are the only ones with this pattern, with nothing like it in the entire solar system. But the question is, how was this mysterious world discovered? And how did Charon change everything we know about Pluto? And what does Charon look like? But before we start the discussion, I'd like to ask you for a like and please subscribe to our channel. This is a huge help for us content creators, so let's get started. It all began. Everything started in the 1990s. At the U.S. Naval Observatory, an astronomer named James Christie was just conducting a routine examination of old photos of Pluto. His goal was to improve the calculations about its exact movement in space. While he was examining the photographic plates, he noticed something unusual. Instead of a clear dot of light, there were some images of Pluto that seemed to have a bulge or a protruding part on one side. At first, it looked like a camera defect or an effect of the atmospheric conditions while the picture was being taken. In fact, many of those images had already been labeled as defective or poor quality, but Christie was not convinced. He had experience studying what are called double stars, stars that exist together in a single system. Because of this, he was familiar with the unusual patterns that could indicate two objects close together in an image. He became even more interested when he noticed that the other stars in the same picture were small and not distorted. If there was a problem with the telescope or the Earth's atmosphere, everything in the picture should have been affected too. But that wasn't the case. Only Pluto had a strange shape. That's when a surprising possibility started to form. What if it wasn't a camera defect? What if Pluto really had a companion? To make sure, Christie went back through many years of archived observations. He examined old photos dating back to the 1960s. And because of this, the same pattern emerged one by one. The unusual bulge kept appearing repeatedly in different positions around Pluto. Together with his colleague Robert Harrington, they tracked its movement over many years of observational data. After thorough analysis, an important result emerged. The mysterious object seemed to orbit Pluto every approximately 6.4 days. And what's even more surprising is that it almost exactly matches the speed of Pluto's own rotation. This is not a simple coincidence. It was clear that they had discovered a new world, a massive moon bound to Pluto by gravity, in a strange dance across the galaxy. At first, it was given the temporary name S1978P1, but later, Christie suggested the name Charon. According to his interviews, it was inspired by the nickname of his wife Charlene, whom he called Char. He added the word on, which is often heard in terms used in physics. But there's another interesting detail. Shortly after his suggestion, he learned that in ancient Greek mythology, Charon is the ferryman who brings souls to the underworld, the kingdom of the god Pluto. It's as if the name was destined from the very beginning. In 1986, it was officially recognized by the International Astronomical Union. Despite this, as astronomers studied the Pluto and Charon system more closely, They realized that it is not an ordinary planet and moon, like what we see in other parts of the solar system. In fact, this is where scientists' entire perspective about Pluto began to change. After Charon's existence was confirmed, researchers had the opportunity to measure the total mass of their system more accurately using the moon's movement around Pluto, and the result was unexpected. For many years, some scientists believed that Pluto was larger and heavier than its actual size. But when the new calculations came out, it turned out that it was actually much lighter compared to most of the planets in our solar system. It suddenly became clear that it was not a small version of Earth, but a strange, icy world with its own story of formation. But what was even more surprising was the discovery about Charon. For a moon, it is very large compared to the planet it orbits. In most planet-moon systems, the moon is much smaller compared to the parent planet. For example, even though our moon looks very large when viewed from Earth, it still makes up only a small portion compared to the total mass of our planet. The situation is different for Pluto and Charon. They're like two partners of almost equal size orbiting each other. Because of this, something unique happens in their system. Usually, the center of gravity between a planet and its moon is located inside the planet itself. This means that the moon is the one truly orbiting, while the planet only wobbles slightly. But in the case of Pluto and Charon, that center is in the empty space between them. In other words, it's not just Charon that orbits Pluto. They both orbit an invisible point in space. Imagine two people holding hands while spinning in the middle of a dance floor. Neither of them is truly stationary. They both move around a single center. That's exactly what happens in the Pluto-Charon system. And their unusual relationship doesn't end there. There's another phenomenon that's rarely seen at this level. If we look at our moon, only one side of it faces the Earth. This is because its rotation speed on its own axis is the same as its speed as it orbits our planet. This is called tidal locking. But Pluto and Charon are even more extreme. They are both tidally locked to each other. This means that while Charon is looking at Pluto, Pluto is also looking at Charon. If there were an astronaut standing on the side facing Charon, they would see it fixed in the sky at all times. It would never rise, it would never set. It's like a huge circle permanently hanging in the sky. Meanwhile, if you're on the other side of Pluto, you would never see Charon, not even once in your entire life. This is how strong their gravitational relationship is. Because of all these unusual characteristics, many astronomers began to ask questions. Is it still correct to call Charon just a moon? Or is it more accurate to think of them as two equal worlds orbiting together in space? By the early 2000s, this question became an important part of the growing debate about the true meaning of the word planet. As more large, icy objects were discovered in the Kuiper Belt, beyond Neptune's orbit, the scientific community found it increasingly difficult to explain why Pluto was special compared to the others. And this is where the data from Charon became important. It showed that the solar system is more complicated than the simple categories scientists used before. In 2006, the International Astronomical Union seriously discussed various possible classifications for Pluto and Charon. Some even suggested calling them a double-planet system. But as the debate continued, a bigger decision was approaching. A decision that would not only change Pluto's status, it would change the way the whole world looks at what can truly be considered a planet. But there is a bigger question that has long troubled astronomers. If the relationship between Pluto and Charon is so special, how did it all begin? For many years, the most popular explanation was a massive collision in the early days of the solar system. According to this model, a large icy object collided with Pluto billions of years ago. Because of the force of the impact, some material was thrown into the galaxy and eventually came together to form Charon. At first glance, this idea seems reasonable. This is also the main explanation scientists have for how our moon was formed after a giant collision with the young Earth. But as computer simulations improved and opportunities to study the composition of Pluto and Charon expanded, some problems began to emerge. They are not like Earth. Pluto and Charon are made up largely of ice and rock. Because of this, they would react differently to a massive collision compared to the larger rocky planets. This is where a newer idea began to emerge, which some planetary scientists are now studying. Instead of a violent destruction, the first encounter between these two ancient worlds may have been much gentler. According to some modern simulations, it's possible that there was a slow and glancing collision between two nearby bodies in the Kuiper Belt. They didn't immediately shatter into pieces. Instead, they may have temporarily stuck together while spinning through space before eventually separating again. It's like two cars that slightly collided at low speed and then continued in different directions. Except in this case, they never completely escaped each other's gravity. Since then, they have stayed together in a permanent gravitational partnership. Although the exact details of their origin are still being studied, there is one important thing that observations show. Pluto and Charon have different compositions. Pluto has a higher percentage of rock, while Charon contains more ice. For many researchers, this indicates that they are not simply a mixture of the same material after a very hot collision. It's possible that they each had their own identity even before they became a pair in space. But whatever really happened back then, there's one effect that scientists are almost certain about. A tremendous amount of energy was produced as gravity adjusted their new relationship. As their orbit and rotation slowly changed, intense friction occurred inside the two worlds, and that friction turned into heat. This is a crucial detail because in the extremely cold part of the solar system where they are located, any additional heat could change the entire history of a planet or moon. Many planetary models suggest that this heat may have weakened the thick ice inside Charon. Beneath its icy surface, a vast underground ocean may have formed in the distant past. An ocean that has never been seen by humans. An ocean hidden beneath kilometers of ice. And if that's true, it means that the quiet world we see today was once a much more active world than most people think. For many decades after its discovery, Charon remained just a blurry dot through telescopes on Earth. No one really knew what it looked like. No one knew if it had mountains, cliffs, or traces of ancient geological activity. Then came a historic moment. On July 14, 2015, NASA's New Horizons spacecraft passed by in the Pluto system after nearly a decade of traveling through space. For the first time, humanity saw Pluto and Charon up close, and the images that were shown were even more unusual than any scientist had expected. Instead of a simple yellowish rock, Charon appeared as a world with its own complex history. A world that seems to have once experienced massive changes within it. And the traces of that ancient turmoil are still etched today on the surface of this mysterious moon. When scientists examined the images sent by New Horizons, one thing immediately became clear. Charon's past was not quiet. Although this moon now appears cold and lifeless, its surface is filled with traces of ancient disasters that once shook its entire world. In many parts of Charon's surface, you can see enormous cracks, long cliffs, and deep valleys stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Some of these are so vast that it's almost hard to imagine their true size. There are regions that stretch for more than 1,000 kilometers, while some cliffs are even deeper than many of the well-known canyons here on Earth. But there's one question. What kind of force is strong enough to crack almost the entire crust of a world? Not an asteroid, nor a volcano in the usual sense. According to planetary scientists, the answer may have come from within Charon itself. When the Pluto system was still young, it still had more heat left inside. From its formation, it's also possible that natural radioactive elements inside the rocky part of the moon contributed as well. Over time, this heat may have been enough to melt some of the hidden layers of ice beneath the surface. If this model is correct, Charon may have once had a vast ocean buried beneath its thick ice shell. Not an ocean visible on the surface, but a secret ocean hidden deep below. But as the moon cooled over millions of years, the situation began to change. The water that was once in liquid form gradually froze. And this is where a unique property of water comes in. Unlike most materials, water expands in volume when it freezes. As more ice formed beneath the crust, it slowly pushed the entire surface of Charon outward. The crust gradually stretched. Pressure slowly built up until it reached the point where it could no longer withstand the force coming from below. And then the surface cracked. The giant fault lines and canyons we see today are possibly permanent marks of that process. It's like a world that slowly swelled from within before finally developing large wounds on its surface. Even more impressive is the fact that this evidence has remained clear until now. Unlike Earth, which has rain, wind, oceans, and active geology that change the landscape, Charon has almost none of these processes. It doesn't have a thick atmosphere that would erase ancient marks. Because of this, what we see now is like a huge time capsule from the distant past. But not all parts of the moon have the same story. In fact, New Horizons discovered that it's like two different worlds are hidden within a single moon. In the northern part, you can see the ancient terraces. This terrain is full of craters, cracks, and traces of long-standing geological activity. It looks old, rough, and full of history. Meanwhile, when you get to the southern part, the scenery suddenly changes. The surface is smoother, there are fewer craters, and it seems younger compared to other regions. For scientists, this is a big clue that something unusual happened here after the ancient cracks in the north were formed. One of the main explanations is what is called a crater. At first glance, it sounds like an ordinary volcano, but in an extremely cold world like Charon, it's not molten rock that comes out from underneath. Instead, it could be a mixture of water, ice, and other chemicals that rose from within. As the ancient underground ocean freezes, the pressure beneath the crust increases. When cracks form, some materials may be forced to rise to the surface. Over a long period of time, frozen deposits may have covered much of the southern hemisphere. This is why that region appears smoother and younger compared to the north. There are also some unusual mountains scattered across this plain. Some seem isolated and stand in the middle of vast plains as if they don't belong there. Some scientists suggest that these may be ancient pieces of older crust that broke off during periods of intense geological activity. If this interpretation is correct, they might be like giant icebergs that once moved across the frozen material before finally being left in their current positions. With each new analysis of data from New Horizons, it becomes more apparent that Charon is not just a simple moon beside Pluto. It is a world that once had internal heat, possibly a hidden ocean, and a history written in the cracks, cliffs, and plains that we see today. But among all the discoveries of New Horizons about Charon, there is one detail that immediately caught the attention of scientists: its color, particularly the strange dark red area found at the northern tip of the moon. If you look at it from space, it looks like a large stain sitting on top of the ice. Because of its unusual appearance, some members of the New Horizons team gave it the informal name Mordor Macula, and until now, it remains one of the most fascinating mysteries in the entire Pluto system. At first glance, it just looks like a simple change in color. But for planetary scientists, it's an important piece of evidence that could explain, and Charon, even though they're thousands of kilometers apart. According to studies, this red color was likely created by complex organic compounds called tholins. These usually form when simple molecules like methane are affected by ultraviolet radiation from the sun and high-energy particles traveling through space. Over a very long period of time, these chemicals turn into dark and reddish material. But where did the methane come from? This is where the more interesting part of the story begins. One of the main explanations actually involves Pluto itself. Although Pluto is small, it has a thin atmosphere made up of different gases, including methane and nitrogen. Slowly, a part of this atmosphere escapes into space. As Charon orbits around its partner, there is a possibility that some of the escaping molecules are captured by its gravity. It's like a slow but continuous transfer of material from one world to another. When the long polar winter arrives in the northern region of Charon, the temperature drops drastically. The environment there is so cold that methane can directly freeze on the surface. After a very long period of darkness, that region will once again be illuminated by the sun. And when that happens, the slow transformation of methane will begin due to ultraviolet radiation. Over millions to billions of years, a thick layer of reddish material that we see today may have formed. If this theory is correct, it means that Pluto itself gradually colored the northern part of Charon, an extraordinary example of two worlds directly affecting each other even without physical contact. But not all scientists are convinced that Pluto is the source of the methane. There is another explanation that is also being studied. It's possible that the methane came from inside Charon itself. If it really had an ancient underground ocean and large cryovolcanic eruptions in the past, it's possible that gases escaped from its depths. This includes methane and other compounds that could have risen to the surface. Over time, these gases may have accumulated in the coldest parts of the moon, the poles. And just like the first theory, ultraviolet radiation from the sun may be responsible for the formation of the red material we see today. At present, there is still no definite answer as to which of the two explanations is correct. It's also possible that both have some truth to them. But whatever its origin, it's clear that the red mark on the northern part of Charon is not just a simple decoration of nature. It's a trace of processes that have taken place over billions of years. And it's also a reminder of how deep the connection between Pluto and Charon is. By studying this moon, scientists didn't just get to know Charon better, they also gained a deeper understanding of Pluto. In fact, if Charon hadn't been discovered, the true size, mass, and characteristics of Pluto might have remained a mystery for much longer. Charon's orbit provided crucial information that helped astronomers accurately analyze this system. The cracks on its surface revealed the possibility of an ancient ocean. Its plains provided evidence of cryovolcanic activity. And the red region at the northern pole raised new questions about the transfer of material between the two worlds. In short, Pluto's story will never be complete without Charon. For many years, humanity thought it was just an ordinary moon orbiting a small dwarf planet. But modern science has shown that their relationship is more special than previously thought. Two different worlds, two bodies formed in the same region of the solar system, and two histories written together by gravity, ice, heat, and time. From a small bump that was almost mistaken for a defect in an old photograph, one of the strangest planetary systems discovered by humans emerged. And perhaps that is the most important lesson from this story. Sometimes the greatest discoveries in science do not begin with a planned search. They start with something almost unnoticed, a small detail, a strange observation, and a person willing to ask why.